Good morning and welcome to Cheche. This is the show where opinion counts, live on Citizen TV, and I'm Udwak Amimo. Now, every election cycle seems to bring with it hostility between the government and civil society. This cycle has been no different. Early this week, the chairman of the International Commission of Jurists, human rights lawyer, Njonjo Mue, wrote an open letter to President Uhuru Kenyatta on the intimidation, harassment and curtailment of civil society operations in Kenya. This followed attempts to deregister and freeze the accounts of two prominent NGOs by the NGO Coordination Board. Well, Njonjo Mue is one of our guests today, along with government spokesman Eric Kiraithe. We also have our panelists with us, Mutegi Njau and Charles Odhiambo, whom you know as part of the Royal Media Services stable. They'll be sharing their opinions with us. So good morning and welcome to the show. We'll come to the definitions of civil society and what exactly it is that we're discussing in a minute. But Njonjo, I'll start with you because of the letter you wrote to President Kenyatta, because the acting CS for Interior stopped the NGO Coordination Board actions for about 90 days. So what do you hope your letter will achieve?
Thank you, Udwak. The letter that I decided to write on behalf of the International Commission of Jurists to the President and Chief Executive of this country was written to remind him of the critical role that civil society has played in the history of this country and continues to play and will continue to play in the history of this country, and to also remind the state that civil society is a critical part of any democratic and inclusive society. And so it was important to write that to the head of state because ultimately the buck stops with him. The actions of his government must be ultimately attributed to the state that he heads.
So panelists, let me come to you because, civil society seems to carry with all sorts of connotations in Kenya. Mutegi, you were being cheeky earlier before we came on air. What do you understand by civil society?
I think, like Mr. Njonjo said, civil society organizations have played a critical role in the democratization of this country. If you look at the law society, human rights organizations, they fought for multipartism, they fought for independence. So, I live in the church. So, they play a very crucial role.
You're speaking to the role. What do you understand, though, by the term civil society? Because before we came on air, you were cheekily talking about evil society.
Well, that's what they have been described as, yes, by people who are critical about their performance, and particularly because they've been in the forefront during the Uhuru Kenyatta government. They have sided with the opposition, the prominent ones that are targeted. They are prominently sided with the opposition. Therefore, they have been described as evil society. In fact, some people think they have no role to play in this country, which I don't believe in.
Charles?
From time immemorial, this society has been the voice of the people. They're the ones who have been bold enough to champion the desires of the people, the desires of a nation, and all the rest. And like everybody else has said, they're actually the ones who brought us to where we are this far. The question is, if somebody grew up today, all of a sudden, and was asked what a civil society is, I can imagine what they will say.
Which is?
Those employers who give a lot of salary. That is the perception people have of civil societies today. They are not
generous employers.
Yes, generous employers. The NGOs of this world. Ask anybody who is out of school, they'll tell you, me, I want to work in an NGO because they pay well. They don't really conceptualize and understand where these organizations come from.
Njonjo, I'll come to you, given your long employment with civil society. Mr. Kiraithe, what do you understand by civil society?
Civil society is a very old concept, and what it seeks to appreciate is that other means of representation, government, elected leaders, do exist and they play a part, but at some point these bodies also create interests of their own, which sometimes detach from the interests of the ordinary citizen or a certain voiceless sector. And therefore, civil society movement has grown to come and bridge that gap because it is societal based. But the most critical thing is that it must remain civil. I will briefly talk to what Charles has said about pain. Due to the crucial nature of civil society in checking institutions, in maintaining a balance in society, and also furthering the interests of those forgotten sectors of the society. In the Western world, there are very many organizations willing to donate to it. The only problem is that these donations, this funding, and the fact that you cannot directly regulate the employment policy and so on and so forth, has going to create cash flows which quite often are used for the wrong reasons. And therefore, civil society is a critical part. But the managers of the civil society, in a few cases, because the civil society is very wide, in a few cases, the managers of the civil society quite often abuse that facility. And maybe later I'll tell you why the government felt it is becoming a security factor because of issues.
We'll get to I might want to remind you that during that time, many Western countries and organizations decided, chose to, deliberately, to fund their project through civil society, not through government, because of the corruption in the government. So Western countries, not that the government is perfect also. Therefore, the civil or international financial organization is chose to do the development through civil society organizations and not the government.
So fantastic historical perspective. Thank you, Mutegi. And so some more historical perspective from you, Njonjo, because the understanding of civil society from all of you, I guess, seems to be contingent really on democracy. But there's a broader understanding of it. There's a broader role that civil society plays, isn't there?
Basically, and more technically, actually, you asked about the definition of civil society. And at the very broadest level, civil society is citizens expressing themselves above the family level, but below the state and outside of the market.
Which is why it's called the third sector.
Yes. So, citizens and our constitution have a fundamental right to freedoms of association and expression and information and so on. So in the exercise of those freedoms of association especially, groups of citizens come together to work on common interests and to work collectively. And that is civil society. And that now comes, encompasses, groups, even your chama at that level, churches, as well as community-based organizations and other groups that are more visible and more vocal. But it also involves groups that are involved in development, complementing government development efforts in the villages, waters and sanitation, healthcare, education. All those groups are civil society, as well as those groups such as the ones I work for that promote good governance, democracy and the rule of law.
So are we overstating the situation of civil society when out of the thousands operating in Kenya, and we were talking about this earlier, I think with the NGO Coordination Board there might be about 10,000 registered, two run into problems, AFRICOG and the KHRC, and we scream harassment, intimidation, curtailing of freedoms.
No, I don't think we are overstating it. I think what is happening is that the NGO Council and those whom
and so for the benefit of our viewers, let's make a distinction between the NGO Coordination Board and the NGO Council.
Yes.
With the council, I think, being provided for within the law, but it's self-run association of NGOs. Yes.
Yes. So the NGO Coordination Board, which is set up under the NGO Coordination Act of 1990, which I'll be talking about a little later. But the NGO Coordination Board has chosen to target civil society organizations that it purports to be critical of the government. So when you ask whether we are overstating the case, I wouldn't say so necessarily. We could say it's overstating because it's about 2 or 3 organizations, but they're the most critical in terms of oiling the wheels of our democracy. And so if we allow independent voices to be muzzled and to be silenced by the government using the NGO coordination board or any other official, then we will be much the poorer for it as an emerging democracy.
Charles, would you agree that there's an onslaught against civil society?
Considering the time that these actions took place, I would
Election
agree.
cycle.
Yes, I would agree that there was an onslaught. And considering the reasons that were given by the NGO coordination board leadership about not being registered and all the rest, AFRICOG, for example, has been here with us for quite almost 10 years now. They were there in 2013. Didn't they realize it was not registered then? I mean, if you fail to file your tax returns by the year, Kenya Revenue Authority are always on your case. How is it that an organization fails to file its tax returns? It takes an election for the authorities to realize, look, these guys have not filed their returns. We need to carry out a raid on them. So I would definitely call this an onslaught, considering the time within which this happened.
Georgia, coming back to you, why do you say that they're the most critical?
Well, like I said, I talked about the different categories of civil society organizations. Nobody is bothering civil society organizations that are digging boreholes in Northeastern. Nobody is talking about the humanitarian organizations that are trying to treat people that are getting shot by the police, for instance. It is those that actually position ourselves, and I put myself in that group, as a critical counterbalance to the excesses of government. And Kenyan civil society, that sector of civil society, has always been there, even during the darkest days of one-party dictatorship.
Human rights defenders.
Human rights defenders, those who are working to promote good governance, they are always they've been there. But since they challenge the excesses of the state, then those who wield power definitely also use their own mechanisms to try and clamp down on them.
There are some people who argue, and I agree with them, that they are hampering development. So those organizations critical of government. You have a democratically elected government from when we had multipartyism from 2002. Why do these people hampering development? You are restraining government. Therefore, you let the government rule and then create development.
Let's get a response to Mutegi's question and I'll come to you.
If by development, Mutegi, you mean brick and mortar development, if you mean roads and SGR and other infrastructure development, then that argument might hold water. But human beings seek to be developed as human beings, and human beings want to be able to be free, to organize themselves, to express themselves freely, and to be able to participate freely in all the affairs of their land. So if you take a model like China, where you say, we will develop you, we will give you dams and roads and railways, but shut up, you cannot be heard, you cannot be seen. We know the best thing for you. You don't even have the right to participate in conversations leading to these developments. Then I might agree with you, but Kenya is not China, Kenya is not Rwanda, and Kenya is not Ethiopia. And we have not sought to be those countries. We want a balanced development, because if you keep people down, if you say government knows it all, then we end up where we were in 2007, because
election violence.
Yes, because let me just finish this point. Let me just finish this point. When Mwai Kibaki came to power in 2003, during his first 5 years in government, Kibaki gave us development, and a lot of it. But that development did not stop us from going down the tubes in post-election violence in 2007, because the human beings, the things that also matter to us in terms of expression and freedom of information and freedom of association were also being clamped down at that time. And that's why we are likely to head up if we define development narrowly to mean roads and railways.
Let me have my airtime, because when you talk to people who carry a lot of baggage, yeah?
And what's the baggage in this case?
Or if, let me put it in a more metaphorical sense, if the only weapon you have is an hammer, every problem looks like a nail. Let me categorically put it this way. And in the first place, His Excellency the President never required a letter from Jonjo to recognize the importance of community-based civil society organizations. The second thing I want to put categorically here is is that we have a problem in Kenya where every problem must be given a political angle. The NGOs raised very specific issues, the NGO Coordination Board, with 2 organizations out of an excess of 10,000. And there were very many options. To go to court that morning, whatever you think about our judiciary, I believe it is working. They had an option to respond to those issues categorically, but the option which was taken and which very respectively John Jomwe is now proponing here over and over and over is that there is a government move to against some NGOs which are defending. There are some which are more critical than the other. Let me tell you that outside of a few cliques very, very high in the top of the civil society world with very great connections internationally, nobody in Kenya knows AFRICOG exists. Outside of our level of the middle class, the person in Karachuonyo, the person in Tigania, in Tonyere, in Kwale does not know they exist. And therefore, when you start saying they are critical to the existence of Kenya, that one is very misleading. What I want to put categorically here is that the government is committed to promoting the existence and the work of these civil society organizations and other NGOs, because in our, as correctly stated by Njonjo, education sector, health sector, look at the Red Cross and all this, they have been critical. Management of drought, peace building, the civil society groups have been very, very critical. And the government has found them very useful.
Then why single out these 2?
The issue
for the
of
freezing
these
of the
2 being
and
singled out
Actually, Udok,
is a very straight choice. You must listen to me once in a while.
And I just needed to add,
when the KRA, when the NTSA stops you on the road, you don't start saying, why are you choosing me and not that vehicle? They ask you specific questions which you can answer. They can take you to court. You can also go to court and get redress. Jonjo, it's unfortunate that the queries raised, the issues raised by the NGO board have even become personal, attacking the person of Fazul, attacking the person
we'll come to that
of
in a minute.
But the fact of the matter is that from where I am seated as a government, and the government is not only one arm, Fazul was doing his work.
Then
the
why
minute
did the
this
CS,
issue was
Mr.
brought
Kiraive?
to the CS intervened because the minute it was given a political angle, you can see everybody here is quoting very comfortably, given the season, given every election time.
Why did the CS, Mr. Kiraive, no, hold on, I would like you to respond to this.
Yes.
Mr. Kiraive, the CS intervened to say that you are taking action without allowing these people to properly respond. And so he established a committee to establish whether the 2, AFRICOG and KHRC, were non-compliant. Those things had not been done. Both organizations had not been given a chance to respond to whatever charges the executive director of the NGO Coordination Board was leveling against them. How, therefore, do you come and say that as the government, what the NGO Coordination Board was doing was in order, when the CS himself, all right, said that what was being done was not in order?
Excellent. The CS carries the overall responsibility for the activities of his ministry. The CS supervises all officers working under him, including the NGO Coordination Board. The CS has wider and greater national responsibilities for political direction and everything. And as the senior-most manager present, strategically, he has a responsibility to come in and say, look here, if the battle is between you and Fazul, let me bring a committee.
Fazul is the executive director of the NGO Coordination Board.
If the action of a government arm is being misconstrued to be political, he has a responsibility to control it so that it becomes, and therefore the CS had every responsibility, and I think that was very wise of him, very critical, and it ought to have brought this conversation about the political season. He even gave it enough days so that by then we'll have gotten out of the political season and we shall be able to see the facts, who is wrong, who is right. But every action by the government department, by government arms, other boats should not and must not be construed as fighting anybody. Unless, Njonjo, you know anything we don't know.
Charles wanted to say something. Charles,
Mr. Cheche has put it very well. The police, NTSA, can stop you on the road and ask you questions in making sure that the law is observed. But the law of probability, it's not just AFRICOG and KHRC. Remember, that's Kenya Human Rights Commission. Remember, there was the Stephen Kalonzo Foundation that deals with education. He said it's not just political. Remember, there was the Evans Kidero Foundation. Remember, there's the one that Rosemary Odinga was alluded to be a director in.
Muhure.
No.
The point that Charles is making is that there's
the law of probability, Eric, out of a possible 10,000, why is it that all these four appear to be the ones that have been stopped?
I'll allow you to respond to that. Mutagi also needed to say something, and so did Njonjo.
I wanted a different subject. So
okay.
Let me respond to that very fast.
Okay.
Charles, as NGOs, he is speaking for, and that is right. He has NGOs, he has been come to the notice. But I can tell you the Executive Director's office is
speaking for or speaking of?
You are speaking of, sorry for that. Speaking of.
Yes.
There are several NGOs which are queried every other day, and they don't associate it. Just like I told you, you can be stopped by NTSA, you can be written a letter by KRA. They write those letters on a daily basis, but it's only a few cases where people read other things, and they are right, that we shall hear of. But I can tell you that if any organization is set up, especially when it has direct links with a public servant or a public figure, and within a few months it has 2.7 billion in the account, even if it is in the United States, yeah, anything going beyond $40,000, and all these organizations have been talking about a few millions of dollars, you will discover that every government will take particular note. And I will give one of the things why the NGO issue was brought to the office of the president. Let us not forget, in our own
Let me allow you to come back to that. Mr. Kiraive? Sorry,
Yeah.
let me allow you to come back
Okay,
to that.
thank you.
We'll have time for that. Njonjo.
I needed to respond specifically to Mr. Kiraive, and with regard to these two organizations, KHRC and AFRICOG, when he says that they didn't go to court. First of all, let me just say that last week was a very dark week for Kenya, because it began on Monday with the Executive Director of the NGO Coordination Board purporting to register KHRC using social media, because all these...
That's where it came out.
Yes, did not actually serve this on KHRC. On Tuesday, he did the same thing to AFRICOG, purporting to register it again through social media. Now, one, the issues he raised with KHRC, he had raised them a few months ago, and KHRC went to court, and the court found that Mr. Fazul was out of order. He took the very same letter and changed the date to last week, and then served that, purporting to register it again. KHRC has again gone back to court, and in today's Nation, the court is reported to have given orders stopping what he's doing. when AFRICOG was also purported to be registered on Tuesday, they went to court. Actually, on the day that KRA officials were purporting to raid the offices of AFRICOG, they were in court on that matter, and they also obtained orders stopping these illegal actions. And with regard to AFRICOG, it must be stated that AFRICOG is not registered under the NGO Coordination Act. It is registered as a company limited by guarantee under the Companies Act. So it does not fall under the purview of Mr. Fazul Mohammed. He's trying to exercise authority that he does not have under the law. And that's a simple question. So when Mr. Kiraive says that we have courts, the judiciary works, we do know that we do, and we are using these courts. but the people, the officials, especially the executive director of the NGO Coordination Board, he himself is acting outside of the law. It's illegal. The position he holds is illegal. The NGO Coordination Act itself was repealed by the Public Benefit Organizations Act, which was passed and assented to by the President Mwai Kibaki on January 12, 2013. So
it has not been operational.
Exactly, and we can come back to that. But I just wanted to respond to
all legal actions not enough. You decide it was a very dark week for Kenya. Who told you it was dark for Kenya? And while
it was dark because
very dark,
for the first time since the 1980s,
everyone is going right.
Sorry, just a minute.
Kenya is going on.
Mr.
The case is moving on, and everybody will get justice.
Mr. Kiraibe?
Let's not spread disparity by saying dark weeks for Kenya.
Thank you.
It's very bright.
John, please finish your point.
Yes, the point I'm making is, and when I say it was a dark week for Kenya, is that we've got a government official purporting to arbitrarily deregister national NGOs who are purported to be critical to the state, and the very following day we've got the Kenya Revenue Authority, which is supposed to be independent under our constitution, suddenly showing up in these very the offices of these very organizations to raid and to say they are coming to carry away computers. The last time I saw that happen actually was with the chairman of this media house in the 1980s, when the Moi state would come to his companies in the middle of the night. I remember Mr. Macharia showing up in his pajamas to stop his computers and machines being carried away by the one-party dictatorship. That's why last week was a very dark week for this country.
Let me ask you, Mr. Njonjo, isn't it justifiable for the government to get worried about the operations of those organizations? In this sense, I've seen arguments that, I don't know whether it's true or not, the amount of money they get is enormous amount of money, not accountable for, and that the foreign people, in fact, I've mentioned a fellow called Soros, that they are getting money.
Of the Open Society Foundation.
Open Society Foundation, that he is financing these two organizations for regime change. They want a different government from that of Uhuru Kenyatta. Isn't it justifiable for the government and Jubilee, whoever you think about, to feel worried about that?
You see, all these organizations we're talking about are registered duly by the government. They file annual returns. They file audited accounts showing the monies that they receive, the sources of those funding, and what they apply that funding for. So for somebody to say that there is a regime change agenda, that these government organizations are receiving a lot of money from foreigners and it's not accounted for, it's just not true. Because all of us, the organizations that we work for, the laws that regulate us require us to file annual returns of who our directors are, what activities we are conducting, how much money we receive, audited accounts by recognized audit firms. In fact, it's strange that Mr. Matiang'i should set up this committee and ask those questions, because that information is already in the hands of the government.
Okay, so we've got to take a break now, and this needs some time to unpack. This is Cheche, and we're live on Citizen TV. Our SMS number is 22422, or you can reach us on Twitter using the hashtag Cheche. And the question we're discussing this morning is, what is the future of civil society in Kenya, human rights defenders in particular? Let us know. See you after the break.